Today's daf is daf Kuf Yud Tes, and we start a new perek. Last perek, the 16th perek, Isha Bas. And our Mishnah is going to address the din of a woman who went with her husband to Medina Sayyam. When they left, there were no children, which means that she was Bechezkas Zikas Yibum. On the other hand, perhaps there was a child that was born in Medina Sayyam to her husband, and therefore she doesn't fall for Yibum. Ha'isha shalach baila vitzarasal Medina Sayyam. Excuse me. So we have two women who are married to Reuven, let's say. Reuven went out to Medina Sayyam with one of these two ladies, and that's the tzara of the lady that we're going to focus our attention on, because the word came back through two witnesses who testified in a court of law that Reuven had died. And now the question is whether or not she falls for Yibum. Well, the chazaka was that there was Yibum, but on the other hand, she went out, the tzara went out with the Baal. So we have to worry about the possibility that maybe there was a child born to her late husband. So lo tinase. She can't get married because, again, her chazaka, as we know it to be now, is that she falls for Yibum. So she can't marry someone from the shuk, unless she can clarify with great certainty that the tzara was either pregnant or she gave birth already. On the other hand, even though she can't get married to the shuk, because we're assuming the chezkas zikas yibum, because again, as far as we know, he died without children, but nevertheless, v'lo tisyab. There's no possibility of yibum here. We can't allow yibum. Why? Because acheteda shema muberesi tarasa. We can't know whether or not the tzara who's with the Baal, who was with the Baal before he died, and had marital relations with her husband, and therefore she may be pregnant. And if she's pregnant, then we're talking about Eches Ach Shelo B'Makom Mitzvah. And she's Asur L'Syamin, of course. So we're in this kind of doubtful situation because we don't know what the story is with the tzara. If she's not pregnant, then enochinami, there's a zikas yibum. If she is pregnant, there is no zikas yibum. We can't allow her to get married to the shuk because maybe there's a zikas yibum. We can't allow her to be misyamim because maybe there's no zikas yibum, because maybe there is a child from the tzara. Now we're talking about a situation in which there are no known surviving brothers. Meaning, as far as we know, Reuven had no brothers, and therefore there's no nefila for Yibum. However, she has a mother-in-law, meaning her husband has a mother who's out there in Medina Sayyam. When her mother-in-law went out to Medina Sayyam, she was childless except for her one son. That's Reuven, who's married to our heroinist today, our protagonist. The question is, should we suspect that maybe Chamosa, her mother-in-law, out there in Medina Sayyam, became pregnant, had a child, and that child is now her brother-in-law, meaning that there is a nefila for Yibum. And therefore the question arises, is she allowed to get married to the shuk? On the side that the mother-in-law is pregnant, she cannot be allowed to marry someone from the shuk. So the Mishnah is machadish, and in this case, we don't have to raise the possibility that maybe her mother-in-law became pregnant and had another child, etc., etc. She's allowed to marry the shuk. However, Yotza Malaya is a metaphor for pregnancy. In this case, the Chamosa, the mother-in-law, went out to Medina Sayyam in a state of pregnancy. Chosheshet. Now there's a chashash that maybe her husband has a brother, and a brother was born out there in Medina Sayyam, and therefore she's kuka liyibum. I'm sorry, and therefore she has a yavam, she's kuka liyibum. We can't allow her to get married. Rabbi Yeshua Omer eina chosheshes. Rabbi Yeshua introduces what we would call a sfek, a double suffix. For example, we don't know whether or not she had a ben shel kayom. It's very possible that the mother-in-law, even though she was muberes, she gave birth to a nefel. And add to that afilu dibta lomar, she gave birth to a vlad shel kayom. Maybe it's a nekeva, not a zocha, and there is no yavam. So based on the siruf of these two sfekos, Rabbi Yeshua paskins that we would allow to get married, and we're going to assume that there's no yavam and there's no zikas yibum, and therefore there's no isa l'shuk. The Gemara's medayek. What does the Mishnah mean when it says he tsarasa? I mean, that seems to be a superficial, superfluous, language. He tsarasa, and in the Mishnah, every word has to be meduyak. And the Gemara answers, Hakam Mashmalon, this extra language of he sarasa in the Mishnah is telling me a mute. Lahatzarahu dechayshini. If this tzara went out to Medina Sayyam with her husband, we have to be choshesh that maybe perhaps she's muberet, she's pregnant, and therefore if she's pregnant, then there's no yibum. So we can't allow yibum. And that's what the Mishnah says, lo tisyabim. Why? Because we might have a situation there where the tzara is muberes, in which case there's no yibum. But the diuk is aval tzara achrite. The emphasis here on he tzarasa. Lo chayshinu. We don't have to be choshesh that maybe our husband went out to Medina Sayyam and he married another woman and had a child from another woman. We know that the tzara went out with him to the Medina Sayyam. We know that he had two wives, but we don't know he had a third wife. So therefore, unless we have two eidim to testify that he took another wife out there in Medina Sayyam, then we don't have to worry about that possibility. We do have to worry about the possibility that the tzara is pregnant, and therefore we have to block yibum. However, if we have eidim to testify that the tzara is not muberes, then she'd be muteres liyibum. The Mishnah says, lo tinase v'lo tisyab. So a woman goes with her husband and a tzara. I'm sorry, a woman whose husband with a tzara went out to Medina Sayyam. Lo tinase v'lo tisyab. She can't get married to the shuk. She can't fall for yibum, or we can't allow yibum. She can't fall for shuk because maybe the tzara is not muberes, and therefore she falls for yibum. She can't fall for yibum because maybe the tzara is muberes. So Gemara asks Bishleim yibume lo the dilma mi abra v'kapaga be'isur eshes achdo raisa. Since we don't know, and we have to consider the possibility that the tzara became pregnant and she gave birth to a ben shel kayoma or bas shel kayoma, therefore we cannot allow yibum. Because now there's a chash and isa kares of ervas eshes ach on the tzad that she became pregnant, and there's no yibum. Because shalom makom yibum, what we have is an erva of eshes ach el lo tinase. But you're telling me that she can't marry someone from the shuk because maybe the tzara is not pregnant, and if she's not pregnant, then there's a zikas yibum. Amai. Why are we saying that the tzara is not pregnant? Halacha rov noshim is avros v'yoldos. A woman within a marital relationship is assumed, within a certain age bracket, obviously, that she will become pregnant, that she'll give birth. interesting kind of a rove. The Gemara is going to wonder whether or not this rove actually fills the requirements of what qualifies as a rove. And it's interesting because the poskim raised sort of like an opposite question. Since they were married for so long and they didn't have children, then doesn't that create a chazaka that she would not give birth through this marriage? So again, why are we asking her l'shuk? Why not assume that for sure the Sarah became pregnant? Again, if there was a long period of time out there, and therefore there's no zika for Yibam, and therefore she could marry someone from the shuk. So Amai, why is it that lo tinase l'shuk halach acharov nashim? When it says Lema Rabbi Meir, perhaps we should interpret our Mishnah as reflecting the sheet of Rabbi Meir d'chayis l'miyuta. For example, Rabbi Meir is famous for making gzeira on kusim that they should be given the status, the stigma of mumrim, because many of them, although the minority of them, were worshiping Avodah Zarah. So this is Rabbi Meir's shita that chayshita l'miyuta. In our Mishnah, we cannot allow her to get married because we have to worry about miyud anoshim. And the miyud noshim, either they don't become pregnant, or if they become pregnant, they have some sort of a miscarriage. And therefore, on that side, there would be a nefilah for Yibum. She can't marry someone from the shuk. And the Gemara says, Afilu tema Rabbana. The Gemara makes a shot at trying to reconcile our mission with Rabbanan who reject Rabbi Meir and they hold Holchim Achar Arov, Kipshuta. We don't have to worry about mute. And nevertheless, in this case, even Rabbanan would agree Shaloti Nase. And why is that? Because the rove here that would tell me that there is no Yibum, and therefore she can marry L'shuk, that rove is an unreliable rove. When do we rely on rove? That's only Ruba the Isa come on. I'm going to just fast forward for a second. I'm a Ruba the Lessa come on is Lo Azli Rabbana Basaruba. There are two categories of rove. There's a Ruba the Isa come on, which is countable. You can count it up. Let's say Bezdin will count up how many votes that he's chayav, how many votes that he's potter. Or Teisha Chanuyos, you have 9 butcher shops that are selling basa shchuta, kosher meat, and 1 butcher shop that's selling treifa meat. You find a piece of meat in the Rishus Rabbim. You don't know if it's treifa or shchuta. Is holchet achar rov. That's again a ruba de isa kamon. The Sanhedrin. And also we counted the judges to decide whether l'zakos or l'chayet. So that's when the Rabbanan accept the principle of Halislina Basaruba, we rely on rove. It's an actual rove, it's countable. However, we have another rove that's not so evident, not so obvious, it's not extant. And that's Ruba the Lesser come on. It's based on some sort of general statistical information, whether it's psychological or otherwise. And if you can't count the rove, then you don't rely on that rove. So we have a very good example here in our sugya of a Ruba de Lessa Kaman. Why? Because you're saying that most women in the context of marriage will become pregnant and will give birth. Can you count that? Can you, qualify it in qualitative terms, count up how many women do we have? I mean, again, it's a psychological rove, but it's not a Ruba de Isa Kaman that you can count. That's my Moshe's thing. And we don't rely, the Rabbanan don't rely on such a rove. And therefore, in this case, they would agree and concede to Rabbi Meir's opinion of Chayshita L'miyuta. And that's why even the Rabbanan would say Lo Tinase, because it's very possible that she is Zekuka L'yimum, because the Sarah did not have a pregnancy or a birth. So the Gemara now rejects it. Varekoton uktana, the Ruba de Lessa Kamani, the Asli Rabbanan Basa Ruba. We're going to prove from a brisa that we're about to quote that the Rabbanan are going to rely on a rove that a katan will be physiologically normal, he'll mature, he'll develop, he'll be able to become a gadol, he'll be able to have children, and that a katana will be physically sound. And we're going to rely on that rove that she's not an islandess, as we'll soon see. And this is a ruba the lesser come on because it's a psychological, or shall we say a biological rove, but it's not something that you can count. Generally speaking, this is what happens. A child will not become a saris, and a katana will not become an islandess. So that's based on sort of like general information, statistical information. That's not the rove that we should accept. Tisanya. And we learned in a brisa, katan, a yevama gedola fell for even to a katan, uktana, or a yavam gadol is now chayev to be miyabim, but she's a ktana, lo choltin v'lo miyabim, divrei Rabbi Meir. There's no need neither for chalitza and there's no heter for yibum. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Why? Amalol Rabbi Meir, Yafa Marta she'ein choltzin. I understand why there's no chalitza, because in the parsha chalitza v'im lo yachpotza ish ksiv parsha, and that comes to exclude a katan. So in a yevama gedola who falls in front of a katan for yibum, the chalitza would be meaningless. He's not an ish. Umakshina isha leish. And as far as chalitza is concerned, a yavam gadol who has to receive chalitza from a ktana, that chalitza is not valid. Because just like we excluded a katan, we're going to exclude a ktana by virtue of the hekesh between a katan and a ktana. And Yevamot is written in the parsha. It says we also Yevim to Ashara, and we make a hekesh between Yevamot and a Yavam. So just like a Yavam as a katan is not cholet, so to Yevamot as a katan is not choletzes. Ella, my tam ein miyabmin. So this is why the Chachamim asked the kasha to Rabbi Meir. Why can't a katan be miyabmin? Let's say he's a ben tes. So he has a bia. His bia is recognized as a bia. Why can't he perform yibum with that bia of a katan ben tes? And you'll tell me ish ksiv parsha. Well, ish ksiv parsha of chalitza, but not in the parsha of yibum. Although one could wonder at this point in the Gemara, what about kavanas kinyan? If that's a prerequisite for the mitzvah of yibum that he's konah, I don't know if a katan is capable of das for kinyan. Amalahem, Rabbi Meir responds to the Rabbanon. You know what? The reason why a katan is not miyabim is because of miyuta, of shema, yimtza, or yimotze, I should say, saris. And ketana, eina misyabemes, kevan shechoshin shema, timotze, islandess. And the Torah excludes islandess from Yibum. It says lahakim liachiv shem, and a saris and an islandess are not ruiyim lakom at shem. So Rabbi Meir says that we cannot allow for Yibum in this case, and the Torah wouldn't allow for Yibum in this case of a katan and a ketana, because shema yimtza saris, shema timatze islandess. We have to be choshish for that miyut, and the Torah itself is choshish for that miyut. V'nimtza pogam b'erva. If it's a nefila for yibum, chalo b'makom mitzvahs yibum, because the Torah has excluded a katan and a ketana, then there's an Yisrei Shesach. Now I'm interested to know what happens if the yavam is a katan and the yavam is a ketana, which is very likely, very possible. Would the Gemara still use the logic of nimtu pogam b'erva? I mean, who's chayav for the Isser of Erev of Eishesach? Neither he nor she. He's a katan, she's a katan. Unless there's such a thing as Maisa Avera shel katan nechshav l'maisa aver. That's what the Gemara means by pogim be'aver, be'er. Rabbanan, they disagree with Rabbi Meir. Savri, they hold that a katan and a katana can be misyamin. We're not being coaches for a saris or an islandist. Zil basa ruba the katanim. Verov katanim lav srixinu. Zil basa ruba katanos. Verov katanos lav the islandist. Ninu. So we see clearly that the Rabbanan are going to allow Yibum in a Yavam Katan and a Yavam Katana based on Rov. And this is Ruba the Lesser, come on. So how can you introduce a Rov of Nashim Abros, etc.? That's a Ruba the Lesser, come on. But here the Rabbanan are relying on and validating a Ruba the Lesser. And they're allowing for Yavam Katan to be Miyabim and a Katana to be Misyabim. So don't worry about Saris and islands because of the road. But this is a Ruba the Lesser, come on. Is therefore we go back to our Mishnah that says Lo Tinase, and we ask the following question. Once we see that the Rabbanan, in the cases of Yavam Katan and Yavam Katana relied on Rov, even though it's Ruba the Lesser, come on, we should rely on a Rov that Rov Nashim is Abros v'Yoldos, and therefore my Lo Tinase. There is no Zikas Yibum. Let it get married to the Shuk. Elamachvarta Masnisin Rabbi Meiri. The best interpretation, Machvarta, it's like, like a white cloth. It's clear that the Mishnah reflects the Shita Rabbi Meir, and he is Choshesh L'miut. And as a result of that even though there's a row of Notchim Exarutz V'Yoldos, which would therefore mean that she's allowed to marry to the Shuk, no, Rabbi Meir say Lo Tinase. We have to be Choshesh for that Miut Noshim. Right, the Miut Noshim that are Mapilos. And therefore she's Kukal Yibum on the side that the Tzara was Mapelas. Frek the Gemara, B'mayu Kimta, what are you forced? You're forced now to interpret the Mishnah of Lo Tinase Ki Rabbi Meir is Amos Seifa. Let's see if you could be consistent and attribute the entire Mishnah from its beginning to the end to Rabbi Meir. It says, Hoysala Chamos. So the mother-in-law went out to Medina Sayyam. There were no children to this Chamos except for her son, who's now the Baal of the Yevamot, at the time that she left to Medina Sayyam. And it says, Mutaros li nase v'eina chosheshes. We're going to certainly assume in the Sefer of the Mishnah that there is no Yavam, meaning that the Chamos did not give birth. Amai. Halach acha rov nashim esarvus v'yoldos. Miut mapilos. When we talk shekol yoldos mechtzes chor metzul nekevos. Right, so you want to know whether there's a Yavam here, and therefore she's kukal yibum and she can't marry l'shuk. So you're going to have to tell me, well, the mother-in-law gave birth to a Zachar, so that's a 50-50 chance. But miut mapilos, and therefore smoch miuta de mapilos lemechza nekevos v'havile azchar miuta and v'lachosh. Since we're saying now that the Rabbanan Einochinami rely on Rov even in a Ruba the Lesser Kama, which we prove from Katan Katana, if we apply that Rov here in this case, Rov Noshim is Abros v'Yoldos, is now we have a problem. B'mayu kimta ki Rabbi Meir. Well, Rabbi Meir is Choshesh L'miuta. So even if you're going to apply the principle of miut mapilos, and you're going to somehow come up with a rov that says that there is no yavam, and if you want to mater ali nase, and that's exactly what the Sefer says. But what are you going to do with Rabbi Meir? You already established that the Reish is Rabbi Meir. The Sefer likewise has to be Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is Choshesh L'miuta. Meaning maybe the chamosa yolda zachar, and therefore that generates a zikas yibum. But why does the Mishnah say in the Sefer Nechosheshes? So now the Gemara asks the following kash. I'm sorry, first we get to the Gemara's answer. The Gemara answers, Dilma came at this chazka lashuk. Meaning until this time, Chamosa did not have another child, not another son. So the Cheskes Kala, if we want to call her that, right? The daughter-in-law was a Cheskes Hetel Lashuk. And Lo Chayish, Rabbi Meir is not Choshish L'miyut when you have a Chazaka. Miyut against Chazaka is Batal Mavuta. So the Gemara asks, wait a second. Let's go back to the Reisha. Her husband, together with the Tzara, went to Medina Sayyam, and it says Lotus Yamen. Why is that so? Why no Lotus Yamen? You're telling me that Rabbi Meir accepts a Chazaka. Is Chazik Liyibu. She was in a Chazaka being Zekuka Liyibu because her husband went to Medina Sayyam without any children. It's Tiyamen. Why don't we say Uki Gavrach Es Koset? And her Chazaka is that she's Kuka Liyibu. So why in the Reisha do we say in the case of Holchu Bailo Tzaras and Medina Sayyam Lotus Yabem? Maybe the mother, maybe the Tzara became pregnant, Lotus Yabem, but she had a Chazaka of Omedes Liyibum. I mean, there were no children. The Yovim Mechadish me, no. Maybe the Tzara had a child. Omer Rav Nachman, Omer Rabba Bar Avua, Reisha Yisur Kares Chashu, Sefer Yisur Lav, Lo Chashu. Well, this statement of Rabba is going to irk. It's going to really get the blood of Rabba, boiling. He's not going to be happy with this. Rabba wants to suggest a hierarchy of isurim. There's an isur kal, so to speak, and which is called an isur lav, and then you have an isur chomer, which is called an isur kares. So now we go through the Reisha and the Sefer. In the Reisha, we're dealing with an Isur Chomer. Why? Because Halach Bail Tzaros and Dina Sayyam. And there was a Chazaka of Zekuka Liyibum, because at this point in time, there's no child. But we're dealing with an Isur Kares, because if, in fact, the Tzara became pregnant, and there's no Nefila for Yibum, then you're talking about Shalom B'makom Yibum, Shalom B'makom Mitzvah, and that's an Isur Kares of Eishazah. We got to be very careful about that. We're not going to rely on a Chazaka that Huchzaka B'chezkas Kuka Liyavam when it's possible that the Tzara became pregnant, because on the side that she became pregnant, you're dealing with an Isur Kares. But in the Sefer, where the question is about Chamos, whether or not there's a Yavam, there's no Isur Kares involved. It's only an Isur Lav of Niseis L'Shuk. So we assume that there's no Yavam. There's no Yavam, there's no Zika, and therefore she can marry L'Shuk. Well, you're telling me, how do you know there's no other brother? Maybe there is a brother, maybe the Chamos had a child. And the Chazaka here is that she's Muteris L'Shuk, because there is no Yavam. So what you want to worry about in Isur Lav, because the mute of maybe Chamosa became pregnant and she carried the full term and she had a baby that was a Bar Kayoma and it was a Zachar and there's a Yavam, and if we can't allow this woman to be no say each L'Shuk. What in the worst case scenario, you talk about an Isur Lav. Because even if I grant you that the Tzara is Muberes, one second. I'm sorry. Even if I grant you that the Chamos is Muberes, so in the worst case scenario, marrying someone in a shuk is a violation of the Isur Lav. Well, Tiesha Samei Sachutza, at least that. It's low choshesh. So Rabbah is making these gradations, this hierarchy, this sort of, these pyramids, so to speak. We climb higher and higher to a more chomer isa. We're going to differentiate between the seifa, which in the worst case scenario is a violation of the lava of Yevamot Shuk, as opposed to the ratio, which might be an isa kares of h's Amar Rava. Rava's not happy. Michti hadoraisa v'hadoraisa. What's the difference between the ratio when you talk about a suffix of an h's and the seifa when you talk about a suffix of an isa Yevamot Shuk? In both cases, you're dealing with the doraisa. Malitza kares, malitza la. We're dealing with doraisas. That which is also is also. And we're not going to say, well, let's be machmer for sfeikis only for Nisa Karis and not for Nisa Lav. Right? No such thing. So we're back now to the original kasha of the Gemara. On the Seifa, the Chamos is not chosheshes that maybe, to say the daughter-in-law is not chosheshes that maybe the Chamosa had a child and is a Yavam, and therefore muterisly no. Say, why aren't we choshesh l'miut? You're telling me that this is Rabbi Meir. And maybe the Chamos had a baby. Maybe she had a zacha. Maybe she's therefore the kala is kuka liyima. How can you allow to marry Lishuk on the assumption that she has no yavam? That the Chamos didn't give birth? We have to be choshesh l'miut. That's the shita of Rabbi Meir. And you're telling me this Mishnah reflects Rabbi Meir. Elamar Rava. Rava says, yeah, the Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. And we are choshesh l'miut. And here we turn to Kuf Yud Tes Amud Beis. But Reisha, in the case in the Reisha of Holcha, Sarasa and Baila, L'Medina Sayyam, and we're going to be choshesh l'miut, and we're not going to let her get married, because even though Rov Nashim is Abros V'Yoldos, maybe she wasn't the Saberes V'Yoledes, and therefore she is Kukaliva. Azakaliv. There, the miut is supported by the Chazak. Right? They didn't have any children when they went out to Medina Sayyam. Right now, she's with Chezkas Zikas Yivu. But if we would use Rov, and Rov Noshim Isabras V'Yoldos, then she's Asur Yavam as an Eishis Ach, but we should be Matol Shuk. So what do we do over here? We have a Chazaka that she's a Kukal Yiv. We have a Rov that tells us there's no Yiv. There's a head-on collision here between Chazaka and Rov. Says Rava, Chazaka lo adif kiruba. Chazaka is not as strong as a Rov, meaning Rov is more chashim and more reliable. Rov is more powerful and more reliable than Chazaka. What we call Ruba the Chazaka, Ruba Adif. So again, even though her Chazaka was that she has a Zikas Yibum, but the Rov is going to tell me that there's no Yibum, there's an Yisrael Ah, and that's where the Rov is head up against the Chazaka. And Rov says that she's Asur L'Syabim because the Tzara gave birth. But now you'll ask me, so if Ruba Chazaka, Ruba Adif, and Rov is stronger than a Chazaka, so that even though the Chazaka would require her to have, even the Rov would tell us that she's Asur L'Syabim, now the Rov would tell her not only is she Asur L'Syabim, but she's Muteris L'Shuk. Avon, the Aise Miuta de Mapeles, de Mapilos. Since we have a miut nashim mapilos, which would again resuscitate the zikas yibum, is smoch miuta lechazaka v'havile palgal pag. Is therefore lotinase v'lotisyam. So we have now a situation of rov against the chazaka. But yet, we're going to take the miut mapilos, which means that she's zekuka liyava, and we're going to integrate that, join that, and link that up with the miut nashim, with the chazaka. The miut nashim would tells us that she's kuka liyavam, links up and joins forces with the chazaka that says that since she went out there without any children, she's kuka liyavam. So what happens when we take a chazaka and a miut on one side of the equation against the rov on the other side of the equation? Havile palgal palg. It's a perfect teku. It's a stand. It's 50-50. You know, no one has the upper hand. Therefore, lo tinase, we cannot allow her to get married because her chazaka is that she has a zikas yibum and is miut nashim mapilos, but lo tisyabim because rov nashim ma'abros v'yoldos, and maybe she has a son and there's no zikas yibum. That's as far as the reish is concerned. As far as the seif is concerned, we're not going to be choshesh for a miut. We're going to allow her to get married. And why is that? When they went out, Chamosa didn't have any children. So we have a chazaka that there's no yavam. And therefore she's muteris l'shuk. Also the rov tells me that she's muteris l'shuk. As we said before. Right? Because even if she is pregnant, maybe it's the Vlad Sheno Kayama, and who says so Zachar, might be in a keva. So now we're going to be mitzarev the miut mapilos to the mechza al mechza Zachar nekeva, the mechza of yoldos nekevos, and then we have a rov. So we have a rov and chazaka, both of which tell us that she's muteris li'nasil shuk, because there is no yavam. You can say it this way, say it that way, but there's no yavam. Either there's no yavam because there was no brother, or even in an event that Chamosa became pregnant, there's a rov that says she wouldn't have a yavam. Notice when we think about the statistical probability that maybe the Chamosa is pregnant and she gave birth to a Zohar, and the Zohar is ben kayom and anamapola, is that called miuta l'miuta, miuta l'miuta, lo chayis Rabbi Meir? So if this Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, and he's choshesh l'miut, and you're asking me why in the Seifa, when the Chamos might have given birth to a Zachar, and therefore there is a zikas yibum, how can we allow her in the Seifa, according to Rabbi Meir, who's choshesh l'miut, to get married to the shuk? The answer is the chazaka is mater her to the shuk. And in addition to the chazak, we have a rov, and that powerful combination makes it into a miuta de miuta that maybe the Chamos had a zach. And Rabbi Meir is not choshesh for miuta de miuta.